point, Rutland wishes to recognise the importance of the Merchant Navy historically and in the present day, and to commemorate the significant losses the Merchant Navy suffered in both World Wars. When I tell people that Rutland will mark Merchant Navy Day, they usually express surprise and often comment that we're a long way away from the sea, which is perfectly true. But the assumption seems to be that the Merchant Navy has relevance only if you live near the sea or a port. However, Britain is very far from self-sufficient, and was not self-sufficient in either the First or Second World Wars. I suggest that one of the reasons rural, landlocked Rutland recognises the importance of the Merchant Navy may be that we still have significant agriculture as part of our economy, and we in Rutland have not lost sight of the importance of food production, nor that the country does not produce sufficient food to feed itself. Britain is dependent upon imports, and imports not just of foodstuffs, but many other basic materials. And we have been, to a greater or lesser extent, through history. In addition, many British products are highly valued across the world. Exports are an important part of our national economy, and many exports use our Merchant Navy. For much of its history, the British Merchant Navy has been the largest merchant fleet in existence. In the past, it served our empire, and in 1939, at the outbreak of World War II, the Merchant Navy carried 33% of total world tonnage. Today, it still has global reach and remains the world's largest merchant fleet. Now, as in the past, much of our food, goods and fuel are carried by merchant vessels. The Merchant Navy is responsible for 90% of all British imports and exports, including 25% of our energy supply. The maritime sector contributes 37.4 billion in gross domestic product and supports 957,300 jobs. The strength of the Merchant Navy is integral to our fate now, as it has been through history. Without the efforts and sacrifices of the Merchant Navy, both the First and Second World Wars would have been lost. Our lives now would be very different. In World War I in particular, we were always only a few weeks away from running out of fuel and starvation. The Merchant Navy's role was not only keeping Britain supplied, but also to supply all theatres of war and our troops fighting in them. At the end of World War I, King George V bestowed the name Merchant Navy upon the British merchant shipping fleet in recognition of their importance in winning that war. In the Second World War, Britain required more than 1 million tons of imported material per week in order to survive and fight. In essence, the Battle of the Atlantic involved a tonnage war. The Allies struggled to keep their war effort, and Britain supplied using Merchant Navy vessels escorted by Royal Navy vessels. The Germans attempted to stem the flow of merchant shipping that enabled Britain to keep fighting. From 1942 onward, the Germans also sought to prevent the build-up of Allied supplies and equipment in the British Isles, which was done in preparation for the Allies' invasion of occupied Europe. The defeat of the U-boat threat was a prerequisite for pushing back the Germans in Western Europe. The outcome of the Battle of the Atlantic was a strategic victory for the Allies. The German blockade failed, but it was at great cost. 3,500 merchant ships and 175 warships were sunk in the Atlantic, for the loss of 783 U-boats and 47 German surface warships. The Battle of the Atlantic has been called the longest, largest and most complex naval battle in history, and the Merchant Navy played a central role at very great cost. So during both wars, no stretch of sea or ocean was safe for the Merchant Navy, yet Merchant Navy ships were usually unarmed except for a World War I 25-pound field gun fastened to the poop deck. Many members of the Merchant Navy lost their lives. A total of 15,707 died in World War I and 37,523 in World War II. And on a per capita basis, the Merchant Navy lost more personnel in World War II than the combined services altogether. It was an exceedingly dangerous task, being a merchant seaman or woman in wartime. Sadly, although sometimes members of the Merchant Navy were recognised for their important role and feted, this was far from always the case. The Merchant Navy ratings had no uniform, so because their role was not visible, people would wrongly assume when they were on land that they were shirking military duties. Ratings would be abused and spat at as they were mistaken for conscientious objectors. During World War II, small Merchant Navy pins were introduced to attempt to stop this. However, even to this day, insufficient recognition is given to this vital service, which is why I'm particularly glad we are all here today. Captain Robert Strick of the Merchant Navy helped us establish this event and used to raise the red ensign. I'm deeply grateful for his past support. Very sadly, he died just before Christmas. We remember his contribution to this event and to Rutland with gratitude. Today, to raise the red ensign, we're proud to have Mark Woodcock. Mark is a Rutland resident and a Merchant Navy man whose family have the Navy and Merchant Navy almost as part of their DNA. Mark's grandfather, Harry Woodcock, was a gunner in the Royal Navy. Mark's father, Eric Woodcock, was on the first merchant ship into Tokyo after they surrendered in September 1945. Mark's brother, Peter, joined Ocean's fleets as a midshipman in 1975 and worked on general cargo and container ships. And he ended his time as a sea captain of an oil rig supply ship. Mark himself joined the Merchant Navy Ocean Survey Company and loved it, and in his time at sea worked on cargo ships, dredgers, supply ships in the North Sea, and anchor handlers towing oil rigs. He left in 1988 to get married and joined the prison service, and Mark tells me that he has very good memories. So I would now like to ask Mark to raise the red ensign. Thank you all very much.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Last year I gave you the stats and things like that for the Merchant Navy. Today I wanted to give you a more personal touch, just to give you a feel for what went on. My family were all Army, but my late brother, who was 20 years my senior, he would have been 97 this year, when his mother and 4 siblings were killed by the Japanese, he went into Merchant Navy's college at the age of 15 and rose through the ranks to be an early skipper of a boat at 28, and then was the senior master for John Swire's China Steam Navigation Company, ploughing his way all around the world. I didn't spend too much time on with the Merchant Navy, but when I was flying off Ark Royal, we always had some merchantmen in close proximity, RFAs as we called them, Royal Fleet Auxiliaries, who kept us supplied with food, ammunition, and importantly fuel. But I have a closer tale of daring do to give you, and that comes from my old pilot. He is older than me. He's 82 now, but we've flown quite a lot together, and he has a really good marked lineage into an offshoot of the Merchant Navy, I think we can call it. His grandfather was a trawler skipper, and in the First World War we used a lot of the trawlers to do mine hunting and all sorts of things like that. And his grandfather won a Distinguished Service Cross. He served on with the Merchant Navy, and at the outbreak of the Second World War, they started to form a patrol service using many of the trawlers and drifters that we had ploughing our way around the coast. And these were proper seamen. These were the Ahab types, you know, who used to up and down rolling waters, cold seas and all that sort of thing. And they formed and worked out of Lowestoft. And you might laugh at this, but there was a place called the Sparrow's Nest at Lowestoft, which was in the, they used to have a pleasure park around that area. Well, this is where they used their place as an HQ. And they took a lot of the trawlers and drifters and tarted them up a little bit, gave them a bit of armament, and a lot of them had a 4-inch gun on the front, a couple of Oerlikons and a few machine guns to help win the battle against the submarine. Winston Churchill, in very Churchillian fashion, was very much in for support of this lot. And he did a visit once to Lowestoft, and complaint, rather picking up the Lord Lieutenant's piece, was that they didn't have anything to demarcate themselves as, you know, a fleet. And so Churchill wrote, and I've got a copy of it, a 3-liner, and it went to the government, and it said, "I want a design by the end of this week, and I want production quickly, and I want each of my men to have this demarcation." And sure enough, in those days things happened quickly, and there was a little silver thing, and I think I was talking to someone today about sharks. Well, of course, the submarine was always denoted as a shark, and on this badge was a net to cover the sort of drift, and a couple a dead shark coming down like that, and a couple of mines on the edge of it. And these little silver, very small badges were held up with great pride by the service. And the losses, we spoke about losses for the Merchant Navy. The trawler fleet and the patrol fleet lost more ships than any other part of the Navy. It was a really difficult line to pick, and I've got some notes from the Admiralty which are really very meaningful. And if anyone has an interest to read some, if you get in touch with me, I'll give you the notes on it. But they had a hell of a lot of DSCs given out, and my pilot's grandfather won his second DSC in World War II. So they did a tremendous job, and I think we should never forget them. But let me hand you over to John Wall, who is not only president of Camera in Rutland, but who is also an ex-merchant navy man who has something to tell you about Italy.
A lot of what I was going to say has been said. Thank you so much.
I'm so sorry about that.
And a lot of the things I was going to say, I'm probably not allowed to. Because I used to be quite a badly behaved young man. I was educated next door in Loughborough and ran away to sea at the age of about 16. The Merchant Navy is a collective term, as was said, approved by the King to recognise the bravery of the men and women who sacrificed their lives on merchant ships in both World War I and then in World War II. The crews were unarmed civilians who tolerated harsh conditions, and as a mainly ununiformed service, were often, as it's been pointed out, discriminated against because they were never in uniform when they were on leave. So it had the indignity of being presented with white feathers. A badge, which is similar to the one I'm wearing, was designed in which the Merchant Navy logo featured and is more than recognisable. During World War II, as has again been pointed out, hundreds of thousands of men, women and children died, but of these, 32,000 personnel were Merchant Navy personnel, representing 25% of the entire service. If you're unlucky enough to be sunk at sea and then survived, your pay stopped that day, and you didn't get paid again until you re-signed on, and that could be like 6 months, so it's quite a hard time. Voyages were often long, and many contracts were over 12 months in duration, and convoys, as has been said, were prime targets for action. Please don't forget, those of you who are in the army and the other unfortunate services, that no plane would have flown, no tank would have driven, or truck been fueled without the fuel brought in on a merchant ship. The country would have starved because no food would have got through. And indeed, World War I stopped because we were very successful at starving the Germans out. This country owes a huge debt of gratitude to those forgotten heroes. We've just commemorated the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings. There were over 350 merchant ships involved, and over 120 men and women were lost. Sadly, I didn't see any of this sacrifice made in any form of the media. And every year it does somewhat annoy me that at the remembrance service at the Albert Hall, the Merchant Navy are stuck at the back of the hall. I think they should be right up there with the other senior service. We lost several good ships and a lot of good people in the Falkland Islands, all unarmed civilians. Sadly, we probably not the likelihood of us being able to sustain a similar campaign looks harder and harder with a vastly diminished merchant navy. We may have the largest fleet in the world, but none of these ships are owned or operated by British companies or British seamen, which is a shame. But I am delighted that Rutland does remember. As I said, I was born in Leicestershire, and despite it being landlocked, it's ironic I have a strong connection to the sea. My uncle Sid was 19 when he was killed on HMS Hood in 1941. My father was a surgeon commander in the Royal Navy. After this it gets better, because my brother followed me into the Merchant Navy, where he rose to the rank of chief engineer as a tanker man. Could never understand tanker men. Going from one end of the pipeline to another just seemed very strange. But he was happy. My background was on deck. I was a deck officer and rose to the lofty rank of second mate, which made me the navigator. So I can confirm that Rutland is indeed landlord. I joined British India, part of the P&O group. British India at the time had more ships than NATO. We had something like 125 ships. I left home when I was 16 to fly to join my very first ship in Calcutta, right at the start of the Bangladesh War. It was one hell of a way to start an education. I remember we had to have a lifeboat drill on the ship, as when you had new people coming in all the time. And we all gathered round as cadets, we gathered round one of the lifeboats, and the mate, chief officer, who was God to us. Captains were never gods, the mates were the gods, and in the engine room it was the second engineer who was the god. He gathered us round and he had this little Bengali sailor with him. He said, "Gentlemen, this is Mr. Azmir Khan. We don't know how old Mr. Azmir Khan is, but we know he's worked for this company for over 50 years. Mr. Azmir Khan has 17 grandchildren, God knows how many great-grandchildren, but he is the only one earning foreign currency. His entire family depends on Mr. Azmir Khan. And now Mr. Azmir Khan depends on you for taking care of that lifeboat. After that, you could have eaten your breakfast off that lifeboat. It was such a great lesson to be taught at that age. The great shipping companies have all gone, sadly, and we have lost the ability to support this island race using our own infrastructure. We don't build ships anymore, and we only train a few officers and crews. They have done a job which has great memories coming to them, and all of those here who have been fortunate to serve at sea remember the good times. Hopefully I remember all the good times, but I tend to be forgetful of some of the bad times. I'm proud of what we're doing here today, and I think Rutland, as the smallest county, is showing the biggest heart. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you all so much for coming, and that concludes our ceremony. Thank you.
Thank you.